Is the connection between existentialism as a philosophy and anxiety, alienation, angst? I think it's something that we see a lot of in our culture today, a lot of anxiety, a lot of fearfulness, right? Most of us are pretty fearful, and existentialism is a philosophy that has been very popular over the last couple of 100 years, although I think it's kind of run its course, as we're going to explain during the course of this video. So first of all, let's start off with just kind of a working definition that I got online from Wikipedia of existentialism, a form of philosophical inquiry that explores the issue of human existence. Okay, fair enough. It sounds not good, pretty benign so far. Existential philosophers explore questions related to the meaning, purpose, and value of human existence. Okay, I like that. Common concepts in existential thought include existential crisis, dread, and anxiety in the face of an absurd world. Now, why would a person who is looking at human existence from the person's point of view end up in dread and anxiety and absurdity? Okay, because that's where it ended, right? As well as authenticity, courage, and virtue. Okay, so there are some positive parts to it, but I think the overriding theme of existentialist philosophers, at least where it became in the 20th century, what it became in the 20th century, was mostly about dread and anxiety. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Now, one of the reasons this really came to my attention, why I wanted to make this video, is because Karl Marx is probably the most influential philosopher of the 21st century. Okay, we continue to see his influence in many large countries like China and others that are still under Marxist rule, and also you see it also in the culture. A lot of people these days, even mainstream American politicians, are claiming to be openly socialist, if not Marxist. Okay, so he had a major theme of alienation in his Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. All right, so Karl Marx's theory of alienation describes the experience of human life as meaningless, or the human self as worthless in modern capitalist society. It is Marx's earliest recognizable attempt at a systematic explanatory theory of capitalism. The theoretical basis of alienation is that a worker invariably loses the ability to determine life and destiny when deprived of the right to think or conceive of themselves as the director of their own actions, to determine the character of said actions, to define relationships with other people, and to open those items of value from goods and services, to own those items of value and goods and services produced by their own labor. Okay, so this video is not a commentary on Marxism, although I'm not a big fan, but my point is that one thing that Karl Marx was able to tap into to create the revolution that he did create throughout the world was alienation. So I think it's fair to say, what are the roots of alienation, and how does it really relate to a very popular trend in philosophy, which is existentialism, right? I wouldn't consider Marx necessarily an existentialist. He's more of a system builder, but I think alienation is a theme that runs through his philosophy and others as well. So let's go back. The first existential philosopher typically is considered to be Soren Kierkegaard, who was a 19th century Danish philosopher, and he was a strong Christian. In fact, every part of his philosophy was imbued with his Christian faith. Okay, so in that regard, he's really the only of the existentialist philosophers that we're going to talk about who actually had any faith at all, right? He divided his existential points of view into the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. We're not going to get into that in this video, but he had as a hero Abraham. Okay, he believed in this leap of faith. He believed that, you know, it's not so much reason that should determine our relationship with God, but it's just kind of like this leap of faith where you don't have to reason it out. Like Abraham was asked to kill his son Isaac, and he did it, even though it was against the moral law, even though it was against the natural law, and he just did it. Why? Because God asked him to do it, okay? But you can see how this kind of mindset could create a lot of anxiety. I mean, if God might just ask me to do something crazy, and at any moment I might just have to kind of spiritually jump off a cliff, even though it doesn't make any sense to me. Well, this is kind of what Kierkegaard believed in. This is what he taught, and that's why some of his books, Either or, Fear and Trembling, The Sickness unto Death, and The Concept of Dread. Anybody who knows Kierkegaard is going to know that anxiety, dread, was very common in his writings. But again, great writer, strong Christian, Lutheran, but interestingly, existential Christian philosopher. Dread and anxiety is a big part of it. Now, the next existential philosopher, who was similar but basically an opposite, if you can have those two words, to Kierkegaard, who believed in individual expression, okay, not going along with the crowd, but he was a big-time atheist. In fact, he hated Christianity, as we'll see here. His fundamental value was the will to power, okay? This is an individualistic, to the max type of philosophy. He emphasized the conflict between the Apollonian and the Dionysian okay, he wasn't all in favor of reason, kind of like Kierkegaard, okay? Follow the instinct, follow the passion, follow the emotional response, what you're kind of like driven to do, and don't let anything get in your way, especially not overthinking it, right? He said, for the sake of life, reason had to be demoted. He famously said, God is dead. And he said that, okay, and one of my favorite authors, Peter Kraft, said the consequences of the death of God, so to speak, were that objective truth died, values died, goodness died with Nietzsche, no being, no logos, total reevaluation of all morals now that God is dead. And anybody that knows Nietzsche will say that this resulted in anxiety for him, because if God is dead and the entire foundation of Christian and Judeo-Christian morals were no longer in place, Nietzsche was saying, okay, we got to recreate a whole new system now. And even though he relished the death of God, so to speak, and the death of Christianity, he was anxious because now we got to create something brand new. Okay, the replacement in his philosophy was the Superman, right? The elevation of man. Man must, go beyond himself. Elevated man without God. And the traditional morality was gone. A new morality had to be started, okay, and that did create quite a bit of consternation and anxiety for Nietzsche. In fact, if you know Nietzsche's life, he had a nervous breakdown. The last 10 years of his life or so were basically, he was like a vegetable, okay? He had a nervous breakdown. He wasn't even able to function the last 10 years of his life. He said, I condemn Christianity. I rise up against the Christian church, the most terrible accusations that have ever passed the lips of any accuser, okay? He hated Christianity, okay? So the next existential philosopher that we're going to talk about was Martin Heidegger. Now, he was an interesting German philosopher, died in 1976, so relatively current. His most famous book was Being and Time, and he had like one kind of obsessive question that he asked, and that is, what is being? Okay, he wrote of Dasein, being there, the notion of being towards death. He talked about thrownness, where we're kind of thrown into the world, right? We didn't ask to be born. We didn't ask to have our parents or be born in the city that we're born in, and we find ourselves here, and it's like, whoa, what do I do now? Now that I have being, I'm here. And again, to Heidegger, that created anxiety, that created alienation. He said, why is there a being instead of nothing? And he said, in great despair, when all weight tends to dwindle from things and the sense of things grows dark, the question looms. We are now asking about something that we hardly grasp, something that is no more than a word for us. We are not able to lay the being of beings directly and expressly. We are not able to lay of the being of beings directly and expressly. So again, he's confused. What is this life? Why are we here? What's going on? Okay, and he was not a man of God. He was not a Christian. In fact, he ended up a Nazi. Okay, he was like an official Nazi, right? He wrote of two things: being and man's estrangement of being. So do you see the theme that's running through these existential philosophers? And then the logical conclusion of existentialism basically was epitomized by Jean-Paul Sartre, died in 1980, so very, very contemporary 20th century philosopher. And this guy was bad news. Okay, most famous books were Nausea and Being and Nothingness. Okay, that was a play off Heidegger's Time and Being. He did Being and Nothingness, right? Peter Kraft, in his book Socrates' Children, said certainly no philosopher in the 20th century had so direct an impact on the minds and attitudes of so many human beings, especially young people all over the world, as Jean-Paul Sartre. Then he says, yet the thought of no major philosopher has ever been so nihilistic, pessimistic, and insulting to the dignity of mankind. Okay? And he says, what does this mean? The most popular philosopher for young people, thousands and thousands and thousands of people attended his funeral and then wept and cried, and the guy hated humanity. In fact, he said hell is other people. The central insight, vision, or big idea of Sartre is what he calls absurdity, right? What is the meaning of life to Sartre? Nothing. He believed in we're born with existence and then we just kind of create ourselves. Okay, no essence. We create an essence. There's no natural goal or telos of a human being. We just create ourselves, and as you would expect, this created anxiety for him. This created a restlessness because he put all of the responsibility of having to figure out who he is on himself. Okay, there's certainly no God, there's no morals, there's no good or evil, right? It's the meaning and values we freely choose to give it. Okay. So life is whatever we choose to give it, the meaning, all right? Existence precedes essence, as I explained. Man is nothing but what he makes of himself. Moral values are created, not discovered. All choices are good, and we cannot choose evil, okay? So it's a really strange philosophy, and it's one, as you can expect, as he admitted, creates just, anxiety, because it's all up to us, because there's no God, and there's no general path that we're expected to follow as children of God, made to him as in his image and likeness. Okay, so that's where existentialism kind of ended up. I think it kind of died somewhat with Jean-Paul Sartre because, wow, that's pretty pessimistic, very negative, right? But that was kind of its logical conclusion. But how did it get here? Who do we blame? Okay, there's four philosophers that I want to kind of blame who preceded these guys, and sometimes were contemporaries of them. The first one is René Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Okay, I. It's a very kind of egocentric, self-analysis, applying scientific method to philosophy, and basically eliminated the experience of the world, and just it's like pure rationalism. A couple 100 years before him was William of Ockham. Okay, he eliminated realism. I have a video about realism and nominalism. Okay, he popularized nominalism. Okay, things don't have reality, it's just a name we put on them, and that was very, very problematic for philosophy. Immanuel Kant, okay, the Copernican revolution of philosophy. We're no longer are we discovering the world, and we're conforming to the reality that we experience in the world, but to Kant, the world conformed to our mind. And so you can see how this would be very appealing to existentialists who want to focus on the self. Okay, it's a very self-centered, kind of egotistical turn in philosophy. In fact, if you read the Summa Theologia, you'll see the first person pronoun by St. Thomas Aquinas like 2 or 3 times. He never talks about I, or we. It's a system. It's not about him. It's about humanity in general coming back to God. The last one is Arthur Schopenhauer, who wrote a book called The World as Will and Representation, very much about willfulness, a very, very pessimistic philosopher in his own right. And I think he certainly influenced Nietzsche, and of course, and they all influence each other. Okay, so this has been one big, avalanche of a small ball going down the hill and getting big and big and big, and has had major, major repercussions in our culture today. So what's the solution? Well, I think the solution is what Pope Leo XIII said in 1879. He was looking at these trends and saying, whoa, 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 we need to do something different. And he called for Aeterni Patris, Eternal Father, a restoration of Christian philosophy according to the mind of St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay, he wrote in 1879, we need to start studying Aquinas. We need to start teaching him again in seminaries, in schools, in high schools, in colleges, and universities. And that's what I do. That's what inspires me to do what I do. I teach it to high school kids. I teach it here on my YouTube channel. And so I invite you to visit my website, which is studythesumma.com, studythesumma.com. I do offer full courses on the Summa Theology, okay? So that is a look at existentialism and its connection to anxiety and alienation through some of the key existentialist philosophers of the last couple of hundred years. Thanks for watching. God bless you.